ethic and the commitment that the whole team tries to bring to the restaurants. So I can get one example that is an easy example is that with a restaurant, we have 3 locations of a place called Red Apron. It's a butcher shop. And we have restaurants and bars attached to each of them. And in that instance, we made a commitment to only buy certain types of pork and beef and pork that was animal welfare approved, which is, we thought and still believe is the best certification that's out there. And also that had been slaughtered, processed in an animal welfare approved facility. Because there's a lot of bad things that can happen in facilities that aren't run well. And what we found after making that decision was that there was 0 supply in the Virginia market. There was nobody local to buy that from. So there really weren't very many sources nationally that would meet both of those criteria. So we worked with a co-op of farmers in North Carolina. We started to, we had to drive down once a week to buy our product, which was a long drive for the team. That was about 5 years ago. Now there are a number of farms and several slaughter facilities in Virginia that are certified. And I think that we've really helped to create and seed a local supply chain for these really superior products and animals. So that's where the mission of Arcadia, which is really ultimately a public health mission, overlaps really neatly with what we can do as a restaurant group to try to change things. But I think that in many ways, any restaurant can model sort of best practices. It can model great ethics. It can focus on the first thing. We feed people, but we should also nourish people. We have to be very responsible about the things that we put on the plate for our guests. Not every restaurant is, so it starts with that, and then hopefully, and certainly, I think Jose is a prime example of this. But you become more aware of what is happening in the food system, the problems, the many problems that it has, and you find your way to get involved. People look to chefs and to restaurants to try to discover what they should be doing. What should they be eating right now on some trend level? Sure, but there's more to it than that, and there's an opportunity. There's a soapbox that a restaurant can give a chef. So I think that the restaurants that take that seriously can make a pretty big impact. So.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I feel compelled to make an observation about an underlying theme. I think some of my work is in disability studies, and in disability studies we look a lot at the idea of interdependence, how essentially how we like to have sort of this fiction of independence, and yet there are always connections that facilitate survival. And I'm seeing a lot of that going on in the conversation tonight. Jose, you were talking about overfishing, and this last year being the first year that farmed fish, that we ate more farmed fish than wild-caught fish. And so that's such an illustration of the multiple ways in which the fates of human beings are connected to the fates of sea creatures and vice versa. And Terry, you were talking about how chefs in many ways help to create demand at farms. I felt as a CSA member a sense of the kind of interconnectedness, because I'm getting those wonderful sunchokes. Just this week we got sunchokes in our share. So I thank the chefs who are pushing the sunchokes, because that means I'm getting them in the wonderful microgreens in my share. I just wanted to point that out, that when we think about food, there's this incredible web of interconnections in terms of human interdependence with ecosystems, with all the different parts of the food system, and so on. maybe just a moment if anybody has any additional responses to that before we go on to questions from the audience.
Well, I think that that really goes to the heart. I can speak to it as the founder of Arcadia, that we are trying to address the food system as a system, because the salient characteristic of a system is that something you do in one place can have a consequence, either intended or unintended, somewhere else. Farmers markets are amazing, and they're hugely important to the sustainable food movement. One of the things that we encounter when we run farmers markets in food deserts throughout the city is that one of the first things we have to overcome is the perception on people who live in poorer communities that this, farm-grown local food is not for them. This is for affluent people. There's an inherent barrier, an unwillingness even to come to the market in many cases that we only get through in our second year of running these farmers markets. If you try to develop a system that is based all around feeding people at the lowest possible cost, and you will bankrupt the farmers that we rely on, who rely on donated food, an endless supply of donated food, and small farmers can't do that. So solutions, and Jose mentioned a great example that I'd never heard about of quinoa. It's a wonderful thing, quinoa, right? But too much of anything can have unintended consequences. So I think as we think about the food system, we're always trying to understand what are the interventions that we can make that are sustainable, that will sort to run themselves, and that will not have those negative consequences, that are beneficial through and through.
And they don't only happen at the foodie level, right? Because at the end, when we have money, we want to eat what we want to eat. And we're a bit selfish. I'm the least of the sustainable chefs in the history of mankind. But at the same time, you could argue that I do a lot of things to try to be local when I can. What I'm trying to be is not, if we talk political terms, Ted Cruz or Bernie Sanders. I like to be somewhere in the middle. I don't know who that person is. I've been looking for it. But said that, I only want you to think that not even when you are going out with your friends and your family to have the best lifetime food experience. When the earthquake in Haiti hit, the world was very generous. America was, as always, the most generous country ever. And America gave huge amounts of food to Haitians so they could eat. Not only after day one or week after week, but many months later, kept giving food sometimes for free, like rice. At one point, Haiti was a fairly big producer of rice, enough to feed and sometimes even export a little bit. We gave so much rice for free that the unintended consequences of our big heart, and this is also food issues, was that we put every single rice farmer out of business. In the process of doing good, we did more harm. And all those rice farmers, you know where they ended? In Port-au-Prince, in the same 10 cities that we were trying to put away and find people homes. So my big lesson here is that when we try to do good, with what we buy, with what we eat, with what we tweet, with whatever, food-wise, doing good is not enough anymore. We need to start doing a smart good. We need to start really seeing the implications and the consequences that everything may have. Because even when you are so generous that you are giving a can of food to people, or you're giving all the rice people can eat because you are trying to end hunger, you may end hunger that month, but without realizing, you're gonna create 5 years of hunger ahead. So even when you do good, you are not doing as good as you think. We need to start doing more smart good, especially on food issues and fighting hunger.
Thank you.
Think of the fish and the fisherman's quote when you say that, because you can teach somebody, you can give somebody a fish, or you can teach them how to fish, but if they already know how to fish and then you're just giving random people fish, then you're going to kind of expose that whole. So all those points are excellent, because it really is hard to hard to do what you think is going to be the best for everybody at the same time. You know, you have to do your research and make informative decisions. And I think that's the biggest thing. You know, try to check up on my farmers and try to check up on what's going on, or if they're having difficulties, or they tell me, oh, could you possibly use this? This would really help me out, you know? And then that's where a lot of times, sometimes it's like, can you take on 10 cases of mushrooms for something? And I'm like, I guess there's going to be a lot of mushrooms tonight. So like, it's just kind of, you know, you run into that problem. Like, they do you favors and you do them favors, and it's kind of like this back and forth thing. So
that's why we need food writers, and then that's why we need all of you, because if she puts that special mushrooms and none of you buy it,
yeah.
use that farmer. She's not doing good. The farmer ain't gonna do much
Mushrooms are
better.
the new sun joke.
So Professor Merrigan here is going to ask Abby, Professor Wilkerson, to call in a couple of all of our students in the class submitted questions ahead of time. So she's selected a few, and then we'll open up to the audience. So we'll go 20 minutes for questions. If you can bear with us, we'll go 5 over. We'll go to 8:35.
Okay. So this was a great pleasure to get to read your questions. And there were so many wonderful questions. It was difficult to choose, but I did it. All right. So where is Annabelle Epstein? Could you share your question, please?
We have a mic.
Oh, she's in the back.
Hello. I'm trying to remember what my question was.
Would you like me to read it?
I think that would be good.
Now I get to read Annabelle's question. Since people tend to eat out more, how do you see our culture not losing our ways and knowledge of cooking as well as of old cuisines? For example, when processed food became big in the 50s, a lot of Southern food traditions died out, and with it, heirloom grains such as the Carolina rice.
Well, I'm not convinced that people aren't cooking at home. You have now many companies like Blue Apron and Purple Carrot that are encouraging people to cook at home, and I've gotten Blue Apron several times. It's a tremendous convenience for me. It's saves me money. I was just telling Michael this earlier. It saves me money because when I go to the store to buy food for my husband and me to make dinner, I spend $100 somehow on all kinds of things I don't need, whereas that food shows up on my doorstep. It's 3 days worth of food, including things I would not necessarily have bought for myself, and it keeps me out of the store, and I just use those things up, not necessarily in the way they say to use them. Sometimes I follow the recipes, and sometimes I don't. So I think that those services are becoming very popular, and I think it's a good thing that it gets people back in the kitchen a little bit sorry. But they might
Blue
keep,
Plate is so unsustainable. That's my belief.
well, they
You only open plastic after plastic. It's like
and that's
having
right.
sex and opening 100 condoms.
That's
it's like,
right.
Give me a break. You only need one, people.
That's right. And
But it's great convenience. But, and believe me, I'm far away. I said I'm a sinner on sustainability. But it's used to me unbelievable because I don't see this. But I wish I invested because I know they're going to make a ton of money. But it's not sustainable. It's highly convenient. But anyway, food
well,
for thought.
sous vide is unsustainable too because it puts,
I disagree with you.
puts everything in a plastic bag.
We want you to keep coming back to this, so that was part of it.
Well, that's a big question. Is that your willingness to be sustainable is a direct function of your willingness to give up convenience.
I ordered it too, so I'm just saying
I mean,
again.
that is a trade-off.
R&D,
We
Research and
we
development.
Americans and one Spaniard are very spoiled people.
That's true.
We are. We're very lucky. We've grown up in a very generous and abundant society, and we're spoiled. We want to make good choices.
Me too. I'm American now.
I threw you in there. Oh, that's true. You are American.
I would just say, I think as much as I say this as restaurateur, I don't think we're at the point yet where people going to restaurants is fully taking away cooking traditions. I think most of the people who go out to restaurants regularly are probably the same type of people who have a nice kitchen at home, pay attention to what they buy and eat. I think that processed food is a tremendous threat to cooking traditions, and I see that. We see that again when in the communities that we serve with our mobile farmers market. That's really the story. Is that there's a whole generation that has become so reliant on food that can essentially be eaten out of the bag, out of the box, or maybe put in the microwave for a few minutes. That has really lost a rich tradition. And we work a lot with we start with the grandmothers. Grandmothers remember and they love to cook, and they're so excited when they have a source of great produce to work with. And we see year after year they bring the mothers in, and the kids start coming, and but it takes time. Processed food is really, I think, the bigger culprit when it comes to those things.
Even we need to separate process. I mean, technically, olive oil is processed food, and the good artisanal bread is processed food. But we're talking about the other processed food. That clear?
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
I mean, as far as like you're talking about the Carolina rice thing, I think there's actually sort of a resurgence in bringing back some of those things because, for example, Sean Brock is actually really big on Carolina rice, and he was talking about how do I get back to this particular heirloom varietal. And a lot of people are coming back to different heirloom varietals though too, like seeds and planting and what is this and what is this varietal. There's like sites that collect seeds and they swap out seeds too. So you can get them at different banks, so you can go online and check it out or whatnot. But I think food is always evolving. So what you eat now versus what somebody ate maybe 75 years ago is going to be different, and unfortunately in some cases, and fortunately in other cases, it may be better, as much as we want to say. So it's kind of it's an ever-evolving system. Like my parents are from Cambodia, and they actually went through the whole Khmer Rouge, and they were in concentration camps. And so before that, they had farms and everything. And a couple years ago, my dad actually just bought, he just went back, and he was working for the government for like 30 years. He just retired. And a couple years ago, he just bought a cassava farm because he was like, I just want to go back to my roots. And I mean, it hits home. So yeah, it's kind of like you always want to go back to where you're at, So that's kind of, it's a good thing. Yeah.
Okay. We also have a great question from Nabiha. Is Nabiha here?
I wasn't sure which question you were referring to, but
I guess you can pick.
okay. So in a generation where eating out is a pretty big trend, like we've talked about right now, what do you think our biggest responsibility is as a consumer when making choices about where to eat and what to eat?
It's a loaded question.
That you go to
You should eat
these
at
three
Hank's.
restaurants.
I mean, I have black truffles from France, Prosecco from Italy, fish from Japan that just was delivered to me this morning. Trying to keep going through what we've been talking, right? What it means moving forward, sustainable, local, or the right way to be feeding the world. I don't think we need to feel guilty. I mean, I'm a Catholic. I have a very good exit. I go Sunday to Mass and I'm forgiven. But the truth is that by the year 2050, I'll be much older, will be 9 billion in the planet. And it's going to have to be one moment of truth that has to be led by, we always talk about government, but has to be led by every one of us, that the decisions and actions that we have will really become an agent of change. We spoke before about eating, cooking at home. I do believe when I go some country, going out to the street, I love. Going to a restaurant, I love. But what I die for is when I meet somebody that brings me to their home, as you were referring, almost with tears in your eyes about your dad and his connection with where he comes from and his farm. To me, I do believe that restaurants are going to be important, and we always talk about chefs, sometimes farmers, never about fishermen, but they're important. But the true change in how we're going to be feeding the world is going to happen in one household, one kitchen at a time. And this to me is my biggest mystery, because I know what restaurants in every city around the world very much are serving, because you read about it or you travel, but I am clueless in what people really are eating at home. This is my biggest mystery. And that's what I want to be learning more. What people in Cambodia eat at home, what people in China eat at home, what they really eat at home. Because if we are able to understand what they really eat at home, we will have a very good glimpse in what the future may bring us. To me, the true challenge, yes, is restaurants, but I do believe that people, every one of you, every one of your families, what we will serve our kids, our children, our loved ones, is really what is going to be the true trend in how we're going to feed humanity. Not only what happens at the restaurant level and at the farmers markets, that obviously is the way we connect restaurants and house and the private homes, but really what is going to be happening in my house, in your home, not in our restaurants alone. Yeah. So very much everyone here that is not in the restaurant business, you are as important in how we're going to be feeding humanity as any chef or any restaurateur is.
Okay. So one more question from the class before we take a couple of questions from the rest of the audience. This question is Ellie Davis's. There you are.
I was ready. I pulled this up on my phone. So my question was, 2015 was a historic year, due in part to the UN Paris Agreement. Were you working harder than ever to be sustainable and prevent food waste? But then an event like Super Bowl 50, go Broncos, occurs and suddenly 1.3 billion chicken wings are consumed. Not very sustainable, potentially. How can chefs, food providers, and consumers work to make not just our daily lives, but also holidays more sustainable?
I mean, I was in a TV show last week with the wife of John Legend. She has a show, Fab something.
She's awesome.
Yeah. and I made a beef steak sandwich. I mean, the number of people that call me moron on Twitter and Facebook and everything else was endless. So, as you see, I agree with you. It's just unsustainable, but we keep doing it. But we have to keep pushing for these other options of what you offer people really to be creative and do something different.
I don't really have anything. I think that holidays in this country are usually, and probably in most places, but are occasion for sort of, enjoyment above all else. We overeat. That was my family's tradition. That was what we did. We overdid it. So exactly how it's how you be more sustainable or careful about that is part and parcel with everything else we've been thinking about. Look at your sourcing, where it comes from. You mentioned chicken wings. I think, I asked a guy who runs and sort of created the animal welfare approved model. What is the one thing, if he could change one thing in the U.S. food system, what would it be? And he said, chicken. Chicken is, if you really look into it, you will definitely eat less chicken. But it is, it's sort of emblematic of a lot of the problems in the system. So avoiding those kinds of things would be a start.
Well, I primarily work with seafood, so it's not as bad. But this is the first year we actually watched Super Bowl at the restaurant because it's such a slow night for us. Everybody typically goes, they don't think of oyster bar and want to go watch Super Bowl. So like I think I had like one group come in this last Sunday, but I do like the Broncos. That was my second choice. Just saying, I'm a Seahawks fan all the way, but I have to put that out there. So the thing is, it's honestly, I'm going to say it's really difficult to avoid those situations because it's kind of like saying it's difficult. It's not impossible to do, but if you guys are out there like part of the food policy program and trying to, put stuff out there and making it more difficult for people to produce chicken in a mannerism that he's talking about, then it makes it a little bit easier for us. And probably expensive chicken probably will actually go up the way it should because the cost of protein for chicken is astronomically low sometimes, and it's kind of scary how cheap it is. Yeah. And so that's when it comes into another issue. But as far as chicken wings go, it's kind of hard to avoid because it's like, one of the foods. I have a 7-layer nacho dip and like wings and whatever it may be that you want to serve during Super Bowl, but you have to make those decisions though too, And I mean, the hard thing is that pushing it on other people, it's kind of like, why are you serving wings, and you get this kind of like perception of like, oh, you're so hoity-toity and you want to do this and that, but it's really like putting out there like, oh, we should be more conscientious of what we eat. And it's not being a fascist about how we approach it, and that's really the hard part is finding that balance. Like, I hardly ever get invited to people's houses because nobody wants to cook for me because I'm a chef, and then there's people who like, it's like, maybe it's different for you because they want you at their house. I don't know.
No, but I can tell you one thing. I went first time and last time in my life, I went to the Super Bowl this weekend, and I do believe the big agro-business, Monsanto and others, own all the sports of America. The NFL, the baseball league, I know they are owned by the food companies. Because, I mean, the game lasted, what, like 6-7 hours? At least look to me. The 3 guys in front of me, each one of them had at least 8 hot dogs, like 1 foot long, 24 hot dogs only in front of me. And to your answer, I will make those games a lot shorter, and I will tell people, stop moving. Nobody's watching the game. I watch soccer, 45 minutes, we're all sitting down, we clap, 15 minutes halftime, 45 more minutes, we are all watching down, we don't stand up. In the Super Bowl, nobody was watching the game. Everybody was coming up and down. Some exercise they do.
You're at the wrong
But the amount of hot dogs I saw them eating was insane. I asked the guys, I'm like, 8 hot dogs? I'm like, oh yeah, man, and we're gonna have 3 more going out. So anyway, I do believe that's the secret of America. Food companies own all the sports team and all the leagues. I know now. That's the Darth Vader, the Dark Star.
I'm going to jump in. So because we're on time, I'm going to ask 3 people just in a row to quickly say your questions. You guys listen to them, and then we'll kind of have a free-for-all for the last few minutes. So Mike, this gentleman here, this woman here, and this woman here. So my poor Mike people are like, what, huh? Hit right here, the plaid. Go ahead.
Hi. Okay, so this was a lovely conversation, but something that I felt was absent, I guess, in a conversation with sustainable, in the title is sustainable agriculture. And so I was wondering where that fits in to your conversations as people who own restaurants when, for instance, animal agriculture accounts for 51% of worldwide greenhouse gas emissions.
Okay, they're going to think about that, and we're going to hear your question, sir.
I love what Chef Andrés said about sustainability and what Michael said about monoculture, and also what Chef Andrés said about farm subsidies. And isn't the fundamental problem here in the elephant in the room topic the stranglehold that these monolithic corporations such as Monsanto, which Chef Andrés also mentioned, have on the legislative process through these huge bribes they pay, so-called campaign contributions to all these legislatures who vote diametrically opposed to the interests of the vast majority of people. For example, you can't get labeling, for example. 90% of the people want it. We can't get it on GMOs. And also these narratives that papers like the Washington Post present that are entirely false about this subject.
Thank you. And over here, right there.
So I'm wondering what you guys think about the nexus between wildlife conservation and biodiversity and agriculture and livestock production is, and what role the restaurant world has in that. For example, I work at Audubon, and grassland bird species are the group of avian species that have seen the largest declines in the past 50 years, and that's primarily because of habitat loss from agriculture. But at the same time, there are a number of growing sustainable relationships in that field as well.
Okay. Now I'm going to shortcut your questions. Forgive me. Meat consumption, biodiversity, the political question, and campaign finance. Have at it.
Well, you mentioned it was meat in particular? Or
agriculture, and so all those products.
Yeah. I mean, so, you know, we've got a butcher shop. We've got a great chef that I get to work with named Nathan Anda, who's kind of the parent of Red Apron Butcher. We, you know, we'll tell people, guests, eat less meat. You know, eat less meat, eat better meat. Meat production is not. It is inherently more intensive than crop production in general. But it doesn't have to be as bad as it is on an industrial scale by any means. And for that matter, you know, sustainable agriculture, newer ideas like permaculture, really old ideas, you know, but promise huge yields with much lower inputs. So we need to see kind of a wholesale shift in that direction. And that's something that Arcadia is involved in, but it's something that I know, chefs in the city always want to be involved in working with local chefs and trying to support the ones that are doing it right, and to do more of it. So that's something that is, I think, every restaurant group in the city is always engaged in. On the chefs want that and are trying to support it. So.
I would love to remember the name, but Bill Neiman, you know, from Neiman's Ranch, is probably one of the legendary figures that began kind of producing meats in what we will call a more sustainable way. His wife is 100% vegetarian, but she's written a book precisely supporting cattle and cattle farming in the way the husband does it, and it's a very good book to read. So it's Mrs. Neiman. I forgot the name, but this is a great book from a vegetarian perspective, why actually we need those those cattle farmers to also be active. So we cannot just forget, but I will agree with him. We need to eat less, but better quality of it. So people, when we give you less of better quality, charging you the same, don't complain.
So go to this gentleman's question back here. Are we just merely pawns of the corporations? Is there such a control with campaign finance and political lobbying that there really is no chance?
Yes. I mean, it is, well, as Jose said earlier, it doesn't mean you stop digging. You have to dig and dig and dig. You know, luckily here you have three stewards who have multiple properties. Jamie leads and Hanks is opening more and more restaurants. So is Michael, so is Jose. And then Jose's branching out throughout the country. And this is the kind of thinking that will hopefully, over a very long period of time, permeate and start changing the way that people think about things and get people more involved. I mean, that's what it's going to take. People have to get involved.
I was going to, I mean, I don't know if I forget the name of the app, and I wish I could remember. There was this high school kid, and he developed an app. And this is just was simple. It was basically tracking where people got their donations from and who they got it from, each candidate, and basically how they spent their money. So essentially, you could go on there and you could just see who your representative is in your local area, and really what they're representing, kind of sort of thing. I can't remember the name of it, but it's like if you're in DC and you want to know what your DC representative really cares about or what they're really doing, it's kind of a easier way for you to figure that out. But on a local level, you can, the different states, you can do that. It also does a general overall view of specific ones though too, but it kind of helps refocus, I think, what's really important, you know. And I mean, not everybody's politically active. I have a very small role in things that I find important, especially with like child nutrition and things like that. But it's kind of, I have to say and put it out there because there's a bunch of people here who are students, you know, and it really just it starts with you, but it continues on with the people who are currently like at any age, you know, and you can start anywhere at any time. And it's hard, I mean, it's hard to state it without, you know, going to whatever, but Monsanto, there's corporations that pay out and they give money to some lobbyist or whoever and decide that like we're gonna fight for this and give you the best points that we can give, and maybe not necessarily the other points, you know, and not give you the full-fledged detail of what we actually do. So that makes it really difficult. What do you guys say?
I'm not gonna lie to you, I wish I was an investor early on Monsanto.
Yeah.
I am a capitalist bastard. I want to make money.
Yeah.
But what we cannot allow is the very few bunch of companies making money at the expense of the millions of America.
Are you guys familiar?
The monopoly we have in this country on the food production is not allowing the software industry, is not allowing the pharmaceutical industry. We break apart monopolies. We don't let one bank or 5 banks control everything. We try to have many, many banks. In the food that we produce in America, the food we're producing for the world, we need to make sure that the small business owner, the small farmer, goes back to the table. Because this is the best way we will feed America and we will feed the world. So I want Monsanto to do well. I don't want them to do well at the expense of my country, at the expense of the health of the children, at the expense of paying workers less wages. I want them to do it if they are part of the betterment of America. But so far, they are part of the problem, not part of the solution. So if they are part of the problem, we need to make sure at the government level and then us with our vote in what we support and we don't, that we make sure that those super big companies somehow become a little bit smaller and not so profitable. Because right now, we are making profitable and we have to stop that. If the day we stop that because we are conscious of what we eat, one day maybe those companies will not do so well. Somehow we are the ones feeding the frenzy for those companies to do so well. That's the way it is.
So as a professor of public policy, it's a very complex issue. I'd love to talk to you for hours about that, but we are going to end with a really easy question, actually probably the most complex question of the night, and that's about biodiversity. And what role does it play in your thinking about the food system and the restaurant plate? Very quickly, because we're over time, a pithy thought from each of you, if you don't mind, please, panelists.
Biodiversity is healthy for the system, and as I was talking about earlier, with our system is capitalism. It produces optimized systems. You know, our system is optimized in a way that is not healthy for us or for the environment or for the people who work in the industry or for anybody else. We have calories that are incredibly cheap. You know, the price of a calorie is it's almost unbelievable how cheap it is. But that's because we're only judging one part of the cost. So when we think about all of the other costs, and that's really, we need a different kind of accounting of these things. And when we do that, then issues like biodiversity will be valued more than they are by the current system.
Yeah, you can clap. Can I give them a challenge, especially to the students? Let's dream for a day that during one full year, 365 days, every day, as our main meal, we're going to challenge ourselves only to eat one or two things as the main meal. We want to support biodiversity because I think that's the right thing to do. Let's start challenging ourselves to doing almost the impossible. Today I'm eating lentils. Tomorrow I'm eating chickpeas. Next day I'm eating beans. Next day I'm eating tomatoes. We can do it. If we will start like this in that radical way, then we have a chance to true biodiversity, and I do believe everybody will realize it's the best way to move forward. But if we only eat chicken wings today, macaroni and cheese tomorrow. Chicken wings today, macaroni and cheese tomorrow. People, we are part of the problem again. Let's be part of the solution. That's the true challenge.
Chef So, quick last thought. I mean, like, I think it's just taking chances and kind of, at least in the restaurant, biodiversity is it should be there. We try to do as much as possible to change that up as much as we can, so you guys get different things on the menu. But as far as biodiversity, unfortunately, I feel really bad saying this, but the Audubon Society, you're losing a lot of traction because there's a lot of deforestation, and that's kind of it's a harsh issue to rebuild back that source. It takes years and years, and it really starts with us concentrating on that and trying to work with what we have and not trying to create so much more, you know? So there's a limitation to biodiversity. You try to get what you can within limitations, you know, and knowing those limitations are difficult sometimes.
David, final word.
Well, I think you have to educate yourself and get as much information as you can, and don't be eating asparagus in January.
Right. So, ladies and gentlemen, I know Chef Jose is going to give our class textbooks to our visiting professors. We thank you very much. Abby, thank you very much for moderating. And thank all of you for your really good questions. And throughout this whole class, and I hope students that we carry this out through the whole semester, you could hear a pin drop in here. So I know that we had a very attentive audience. I hope you enjoyed it. And come back March 3rd, because we will be opening up class again on that night, and the theme will be food and culture. Keep your ears open for news of the new GW Food Institute. Have a great evening.
Great.